A fax machine changed my life. It may sound absurd, but it totally did. I was an intern with the United Nations World Food Programme when the 9/11 terrorist attack took place. Wanting to make myself useful in the aftermath, I offered my time to the Public Relations Department. They were overwhelmed and I was keen to learn, so it made sense. But I did not expect what followed next. Faxing press releases to every media house in the country was not my idea of a dream job. But well, like any hardworking intern, it was a job I did with utmost devotion. I spent many long evenings standing by the fax machine in the corridor, clicking fax, send, and exchanging distant goodbyes with the head of logistics at the time. One day, he called me to his office and said, "Aysha, I'm starting a new project for Afghanistan, the United Nations Joint Logistics Center, and hiring a team for it." He paused briefly and went on to say, "It is not that I want to hire anyone for that team. I want to hire you. If you can send those faxes with such devotion, I would like to see what else you're capable of achieving." Not only did he offer me a job, he also opened a whole new world for me. In him, I saw the kind of a leader who notices potential in small acts of commitment and dedication. A leader who creates opportunities for newcomers. This brings me to the first lesson on leadership I would like to share with you today. Leaders create opportunities for the younger generation. 64% of Pakistan's population is under the age of 30, and their biggest issue? Unemployment. The World Bank estimates that youth unemployment has been steadily rising over the last decade and has exceeded the overall rate of unemployment in the country. An earlier Gallup survey found that 1 in every 4 households was affected by unemployment, and those unemployed were mostly the young. As leaders of today, I strongly believe it is our responsibility to create opportunities for these leaders of tomorrow. If we fail to empathize, engage, and empower our young, their disillusionment will be devastating for our country's future. My second lesson in leadership came about when I could still fit in the definition of youth. At the age of 23, I was asked to organize the Afghan presidential election for the refugees living in Islamabad. This was my first time to organize an election. It was also the first time I had to lead a team. Time frame was short and the project politically sensitive, so naturally I was overwhelmed and turned to my lifelong mentor, my father. "You can't do this alone," he said. "You need your people by your side. Inspire them, and they will make it happen." This is the second lesson on leadership that I would like to share today. Leaders inspire people with a shared sense of vision and a collective sense of purpose. In the decade that followed, some of the most defining experiences of my life involved conducting post-conflict elections for Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq, and Libya. Each of these elections were conducted under a unique, rather unconventional set of circumstances. There were political and social complexities, time was often a luxury, pressure always high, and delay never an option. I mean, you can't delay a national election, can you? So all of us worked very hard day and night to make those elections possible. What kept many of us going through those long days and nights was a shared vision for a better, more peaceful future of these countries. What also kept us going was a higher collective sense of purpose that was larger than each of us as an individual. But in such high-pressured environments, stress often breaks people down, and it is not always possible to stay connected with that sense of vision. This is where leadership comes in. A leader who can reconnect people with their vision and the purpose can reignite the fuel that drives people individually and collectively. I experienced this in each of that election, but there is one moment that particularly stood out. In 2012, I worked with a young team of millennials to conduct overseas voting for the Libyan elections in UAE. It was the final day before the election, and we had just finished the final round of training when they started to feel overwhelmed by the gravity of the task ahead and expressed their concerns and fears. As their leader, I saw it as my responsibility to make sure that their spirits remained high and they remained focused on the big task ahead. So we discussed each of their concerns, came up with solutions, and then I reminded them of the great responsibility and privilege they had being a part of their country's history in the making. Rest was history. Over the next 3 days, this young team of Libyans conducted the elections wrapped around in flags, singing national songs with tears of joy in their eye. It still makes me emotional and proud to think what this young team was able to achieve in just under 6 weeks. Now, it may all sound inspirational, but inspiration alone is not enough. Engagement is equally important. And meaningful engagement requires empathy. This brings me to the third lesson on leadership. Effective leaders lead from a place of empathy. As Theodore Roosevelt said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. This I learned through my father, who modeled leading from a place of empathy despite his rank in the military. From a very young age, I grew up listening to his stories about compassion and leading his men from the front line when faced with danger. You must care for your men, he would say. And true enough, every time I witnessed him around his soldiers, I was struck by his compassion for them. He remembered all their names, don't ask me how, addressed them individually, asked how they were doing, how their families were doing, boosted their morals, and made sure that their needs were met. Alongside him, my mother did the same for their families. She was their friend, their teacher, their counsel, their guide. As a young kid, it was quite amazing to experience this power of human connection, which also taught me the power of empathy. Years later, as I worked in countries that were devastated by war, it became very clear to me that the only place to lead is to lead from a place of empathy. So what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to put ourselves in others' shoes. It is the ability to understand others' perspectives, their situations, and their emotions. But empathetic leadership is not just about sprinkling tender love and care. It is good business practice. It is good leadership practice. When we are able to lead from a place of empathy, we are able to truly connect with the people, engage them, and foster a relationship of trust. Research shows that engagement drives productivity and empathy drives engagement. When people feel more engaged, they're more productive, more committed, more creative, and more aligned with a shared vision. It really is a win-win, but still, many struggle with it. Cultivating empathy may be hard because of the many myths that surround leadership. Myths like emotions are a sign of weakness, or myths that emotions cloud a leader's judgment, or that strong leaders don't reveal their emotions. I believe there is no better time to shatter these myths than now. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. A global pandemic that has made it absolutely clear that cultivating empathy is not just desirable, it is critical. Compare those leaders who have led from a place of empathy and been extremely effective in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis to those who have failed to do so. The world is hailing these leaders and talking about their leadership style, their empathetic way of leading. Now, if you will notice, these outstanding leaders happen to be women. This brings me to my fourth lesson in leadership. After this exciting decade of experiences that taught me so much about leadership and tested my leadership abilities, I briefly paused when I became a mother. This is when I became aware of the gender leadership gap. This is also when I became aware of how big a problem the gender gap is. World Economic Forum estimates that it will take 100 years to close the gender gap at this pace. 100 years for you and I and our sons and daughters and many generations to come to experience the world as equals. 100 years for women to have equitable ground. As a woman and a mother of a beautiful daughter, this is not acceptable to me. And this should not be acceptable to you. Why? Because leaving behind half our population has its effect on our economy, our companies, our policies, and our communities. Estimates show that if women's workforce participation equals to that of men, GDP gain by 2025 in Pakistan will be 60%. Imagine that. So my fourth lesson in leadership is that responsible leaders consciously invest in closing the gender gap. This is the 21st century, and women are still underrepresented in our parliaments, in our companies, in our public institutions, and as heads of state. Women also are underrepresented in the leadership roles in sectors like the non-profit, academia, textile, and health, where they generally outnumber men. So what do we need to do? We need to build a future generation of female leaders. We need to invest in their ambitions, their dreams, their careers. And we need to do that now. To do my part, I've started Project Girls for Girls Pakistan with a bunch of amazing women who also believe that we need to consciously invest in building up the future generation of women leaders. Through our leadership programs, we are helping young women develop the courage, vision, and skills to take on public leadership. And we are not alone in this endeavor. Project Girls for Girls is a global nonprofit running in 19 countries where 400 of us women have come together to mentor this future generation of women leaders. Over the last 4 years, we have inspired and trained more than 2,000 girls globally. Each of this girl has a story worth telling. Stories of hope, stories of courage, stories of compassion, and stories of a shared vision for a more equal and inclusive world. Each of them is carving their own model of leadership. Each of them is leading change in their circles and their communities, without a title or a rank or a position or authority. This brings me to the last lesson on leadership I would like to share with you today. Leadership is not about titles or ranks or positions or authority. Leadership is about impact. Impact that we make on our people, impact that we create through our missions, our visions, our businesses, impact that we have on our collective world. Just because someone has a title or a rank or a position does not make them a leader. And you don't need a title to be a leader. If you are creating opportunities for others, you are a leader. If you are inspiring people with a shared vision, you are a leader. If you are enabling and empowering people from a place of empathy, you are a leader. If you are challenging status quo to build a more equal and inclusive world, you are a leader. So the next time you think about leadership, ask yourself, what is my model of leadership? Do I have empathy at the center of it? And what impact can I create through my leadership? Thank you.